I'm first going to ask our panellists just to introduce themselves, and then I'm going to ask them each in turn to give us 3 minutes on their specialist subject, which they will have prepared in advance. So,
good morning. My name's Gavin Zaprzala-Banks, and I'm Principal at Punter Southall Aspire.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Vidler. I'm Director of External Affairs at the Pensions and Lifetime Savings Association.
I'm Tim Sharp. I'm Policy Officer at the TUC.
And I'm Pete Strudwick. I'm Pension and Benefits Partner at LV.
Thank you. And just one thing to add to it, whilst obviously everyone has a specialist subject they prepared in advance, you too can contribute to the general knowledge round at the end by sending questions through to Slido in what is now the traditional fashion. So, but I'd like to start with Peter and your specialist subject, which I believe is helping employees to understand what they're targeting.
That's right, and I think it's good to follow Steve on this one because he's done some good positioning for me, which is quite helpful. He's told us that people aren't saving enough for retirement, and we know, it's something we all know, but what I want to try and draw out is how we help employers understand that that is true, to build a business case as to why you need to help employees understand that as well. So we know the world is changing for us as employers, we know the world is changing for employees. The vast majority of people are now going to be saving for their retirement in a defined contribution type pension scheme. And I think the disservice we're doing to people who are saving in those type of schemes at the moment is very much around helping them understand what good looks like. It's about helping them set targets so that they know that what they're heading towards is going to be a good outcome rather than just an outcome. And I think employers have a role to play in that as well. So the first question I always ask myself at that point, because it's part of my role, is, as an employer, why am I interested in that? Why do I want to help my employees get to a good position? And I think there's a strong business case there built around two real key principles. The first one, well, actually three in reality. The first one is an obvious one. It's morally the right thing to do, but that doesn't really hold that much weight in the corporate world when you are building a business case. So really what you want to be looking at here is the strategic HR risks of an ageing workforce, and that at some point someone is going to be left holding the baby, to use a phrase, and you want to understand what that looks like from your own organisation's point of view. Secondly, it's about the return on investment. Thanks to some of the great work that Steve has done, we have auto-enrolment, so as employers we're all paying money into pension schemes, and quite often that's a significant amount of money. Are we, as employers, actually getting the benefit that we should be getting from that money that we're paying in? Is it doing what we need it to do? Is it doing what we want it to do? And I think if you start to look at those questions, you start to build a business case as to why you might want to do more for employees. So the starting point for me is, from the employer's perspective, is to understand across your employee base, what do their long-term pension outcomes look like against a sensible target as well. So you're not just looking at it in isolation, because 100,000 to some person might be good, whereas 500,000 pot of money to another person might be bad. And you need to understand what that looks like for individuals. So it's about setting targets. And once you've done that analysis, you know where your people stand against those targets. You need to start sharing that information out with them. And I think you need to share it out in that exact way. We need to be telling our employees, this is where you're heading right now, but this is what good looks like. And this is how you get from A to B. So we need to roll this out with really strong guidance alongside it, guidance that is really giving people a recommendation as to what they want to do. In fact, I'd probably go further and make a case for independent financial advice for employees as well. I understand that there's costs associated with that, but I think if it can be achieved effectively, efficiently, and in a cost-effective way, then I think there's real value to doing that. Because I think if we can add into people's thinking this target and we help them understand how they get there, their behaviour will start to change. As part of that, I think we need to consider giving employees time as well. So we do spend a lot of time saying, well, you can look at this in your lunch break, you can look at this when you get home. Actually, if we were to give people half an hour a year to understand where they are, understand what their target is, to go through a guidance process or an advice process within the workplace, I think we'd see a real change in people's behaviour in the world of pension saving. They will understand the problem. They will start to own that problem themselves. So you might not have to pay that much more money in as an employer to get them where you want to get them to, but they will understand what they need to do much more to get them where they need to get to. And does that work from an employer's point of view? I think it does, because I think it helps you to mitigate those first two risks that I was talking about.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thank you very much indeed for that, Peter. You passed on. No, you didn't. So I can make that up. So what I think that does perfectly do, though, is allow me to pass on to Graham, because we're talking about encouraging the need to save. And I know what you'd like to talk about is a little bit more about what people are actually using to fund retirement.
Yes, absolutely. And while my specialist subject is really pensions, I'm actually going to talk a little bit more about property today in the housing market, because I think it's a vital context for people's retirement saving decisions. Because I think the state of the housing market today is doing a number of things in relation to retirement saving. Firstly, it's inhibiting people's ability to save for retirement, and indeed even to think about saving for retirement. And secondly, in the future, I think we'll see that it adds to people's costs in retirement. The typical today example of you enter retirement mortgage-free is not going to be the reality for many in 15, 20, 25 years' time. These are quite fundamental changes from the experience of baby boomers retiring today. And I want to look at it through the lens of Generation X. Broad group of people aged 35 to 55 roughly, probably the bulk of most of your workforces actually. And in pension terms, we worry about this group a lot because, as Steve was saying earlier, by and large, they're too young to have benefited from DB unless they're in the public sector. And by and large, they're too old to have got the full benefit of automatic enrolment. If they're dependent on automatic enrolment, then they'll have been automatically enrolled 20, 25 years into their career. They have big problems in saving enough for their retirement through a pension. And what's happening to them in the housing market? Well, ownership, property ownership amongst that group has fallen from around about 80% to less than 60% over the last 2 decades. And it's still falling, year on year it's falling. But it's still the expectation among that group that they will own their own home, get on the housing ladder. They still plan to do so. Indeed, more than 40% of that group see their home as part of their retirement income planning. They don't yet know how they're going to use it, whether it's equity release, whether it's downsizing, whether it's taking in a lodger. But in their heads, they think their home is going to be part of their retirement income. 25% of people, this is about 2 million people who hold that thought in their mind, don't yet own a property. So they're basing their retirement income plans in large part on an asset they don't even own and can't afford. Really difficult times for this group stuck in the middle between baby boomers and millennials, I think. What, you'll probably be asking, does all of that mean for pensions and savings in the workplace? Well, I think we have a situation where housing, retirement saving, retirement planning are much more closely linked than they ever have been before. And I was chairing a conference at our own venue yesterday on a very similar topic, actually. And I'll borrow a thought from one of our speakers, HR director from a large multinational manufacturer, who was very, very inspiring, actually. She talked about how she was very passionate about pensions. Her employer was very passionate about pensions as well. She thought they were absolutely central to people's retirement income strategies. But in order to get people saving more into a pension, which she thought was the right thing to do, her company thought was the right thing to do, she had to give people other options. She had to recognise that they had short-term savings pressures, that if you just let them fester away outside the pension, you couldn't credibly talk to people about saving more in the pension. If, as she did, she wanted to invest in financial education in the workplace, it couldn't just be financial education about retirement saving, about pensions. It had to broaden out to take into account people's overall financial circumstances. And I suspect that many of you have, or will in future, find that your workforces are in a similar situation. That the job for Generation X, and I suspect, as we're going to hear from my colleague, for the millennials who come behind them, is going to get very much more difficult than it has been in the past.
That's great. Many thanks for that, Graham. And I think that also leads me neatly on when we're talking about the workforce as a whole, towards looking at some changing work patterns as well. And I know, Tim, that's something that you're keen to give us 3 minutes on here.
Yeah, I'm quite keen to take on the notion of flexibility that also gets bandied about and talk about in pensions, and particularly in the context of an increasingly flexible jobs market. I think our understanding of what's going on is sometimes hindered by a slightly rose-tinted view of what flexibility means in the job markets. We have in our heads sometimes a sort of coffee shop freelancer with a macchiato in one hand and tapping away, sort of playing potential clients off against each other with the other. And reality is that for flexible labour markets, for lots of people, they're to be found in warehouses, in food delivery, in hotel kitchens. And our figures, we estimate that something like 10% of the workforce, so 3.2 million people, are in some form of insecure work, whether that be low-paid self-employed or zero-hours contracts or agency work. And if the trends continue, we'll have another 300,000 within the net by 2020. So what do you do about the growing casualisation of the labour market when it comes to planning for retirement? When somebody's not sure who their employer might be, I guess, tomorrow, let alone for the rest of their lives. And I think typically in sort of pensions debates, we get to the old favourites of things like the iPhone app, as if people are going to turn away from Facebook for a minute to double their contributions to their long-term savings. Or we maybe talk about using pension savings for something else, whether it's savings for a home, or maybe people can dip in to pay for a wedding, as if we can use the same pot of money twice. So I think that, and the government is buys into some of this as well. We have the sort of ludicrous spectacle of pensions freedom, because everyone is different and somehow becomes an investment expert at age 55, or the LISAs that are going to enthuse people to save for a house and a pension at the same time, though we don't quite know how the two things interact and are on different time frames. So what I think the case I'm trying to make is that we should go back to basics, to quote a former Prime Minister, and harness the inflexibility of the pension system. While there are many uncertainties about how the labour market will develop, what we do know is that people need an income to live off when they're no longer getting an income from their job. And I think most research amongst savers actually shows that in retirement they highly value an income stream as well. And we also know that from long experience that relying on individual initiative for saving doesn't work. So I think as a society we have to acknowledge that income generation for retirement is a priority. A lot of that is going to come from the state, particularly for future generations. We've heard about the Steve Webb's inverted U. People are going to have a lot less from occupational pensions. So let's stop pretending that state pension is somehow just an old people's issue and think seriously about how we bring it up to a decent level. And let's build on auto-enrolment, so as many people as possible saving into a pension month after month after month, as long as they stay in work. And I think that means things like, let's stop excluding so many low earners, by which we pretty much mean women, from being automatically enrolled as we do now. Let's rope in the self-employed, and let's make sure that contributions going in give people a proper chance of a decent income in retirement. And as people exit the jobs market, let's nudge or let's shove them towards making a sensible decision about what they do with that money, which is going to be in large part using the bulk of it to pay from income. So I think in particularly flexible times, let's value and build on the inflexibility of a pension.
Thank you very much indeed, Tim. And Gavin, all of this lies ahead for Generation Y and for Millennials. How's this going to work out for them?
Yeah, it certainly does. So Generation Y and Z both lie ahead, and I've already been asked a couple of times today if there's a difference between those two. So just to quickly cover that off, those two generational groups count for about 28 million people in the UK at the moment, pretty evenly spread between the two. That's a significant amount of our population. About 40-odd% of the total population sit in Generation Y and Z. And so clearly there's a lot that needs to be done for those groups. Now, Generation Y, or Millennials, as they've become fairly commonly referred to, are those people in their early 20s up to their mid-30s. Generation Z are the people coming through behind them. So anyone that's under age 21 will fall into that Generation Z. Someone born after Tony Blair's government took power in '97, you pretty much become a Generation Zer. And we know that the market's hard for those people. We know that people who graduated in 2016 will have approximately £44,000 of student debts. Their first salary is likely to be £20,000. And the upfront costs for buying a first home in 2016 were £23,000. So there's a huge maelstrom of pressures on these people to get their money working for them as effectively as possible. And that's a real challenge. That will see their outlook shift hugely from what us as largely Generation Xers will have experienced or will look to do in the future. Generation Z particularly are the first truly globalised generational group. They're better connected and faster connected than any other group we've had before, and that has an impact. The telephone, for instance, took 75 years to reach 50 million users. The Angry Birds app took 35 days to do the same. It's much, much faster than it's ever been before, and that engagement is changing. That spread of messages is changing massively. These people, Generation Z, they won't buy a car. It's less likely they'll buy a car. They'll take an Uber. They won't buy CDs and DVDs. They'll stream content when they want it. And so that whole approach needs to be revised. But what I don't want to say is that what we're doing already is wrong, because we need distinct approaches. We need distinct content, distinct engagement that works for the right group at the right time. What we've already done so far to this point, auto-enrolment is a perfect example, is succeeding. What auto-enrolment has achieved up to this point has been fantastic, and we mustn't throw the baby out with the bathwater and decide that what we've achieved so far isn't going to be good enough for what is yet to come. But we need to think about tweaking our approach and about honing our approach, because if we just continue to do what people in their 60s, 50s and 40s have been used to and have expected, then it won't work for those people who currently are in school and planning for jobs that don't yet even exist. And so we need to think about those groups of people and how we will engage with those groups of people. And we've mentioned nudge theory already. Nudge theory is a great concept and is a fantastic way of improving engagement, of getting workplace savings working for Generation Y and Z. But we now need to take that a step further. We need to talk about engagement through shared experience. We need to talk about engagement through personalisation. And these are the ways that Generation Z will end up engaging with pensions, engaging with workplace benefits, and creating something that will work for them in the future.
That's great. Many thanks indeed for that, Gavin. So we've heard some fantastic ideas and analysis from the panel here. What I'd like to do is draw it all together in what is clearly not a general knowledge round. It's about pensions and workplace savings. But pull together some of the topics here and have a look at what we've had through on Slido so far, because we've actually got an excellent range of questions, which I've just kind of lost on my iPad. There we go. So I think if we're going to start with the most popular one at the top for now, which is I find pension saving is lower than paying off debt or home buying until the age of 35. Wouldn't a payment to assist with life issues or saving work better? He likes us. He's
So I'm happy to start with that one, really. I think the question is kind of driving at, is pension saving a lower priority than those things, which I think is certainly where people start from. I think certainly if you ask people under 35 to rank their priorities, home buying would probably appear considerably higher than saving for retirement. Not so sure about paying off debt. Actually, there's some good evidence that says even though people are carrying around student loans with them, they don't really think of them as debt. So they've got them in a different sort of mental space. So wouldn't a payment to assist with life issues or saving work better? I think you need both. I think you need a bedrock of pension saving starting at 22. I think actually you need it earlier than 22, and one of the things that we'll be looking at in the automatic enrolment review that's happening at the moment is whether or not that lower age should be brought forward to 18. But that's a relatively low level of saving, and I think it leaves room on top for employers to design different strategies which are maybe helping their employees get on with their shorter-term priorities.
Just to add to that, something that's been going through my head recently is actually around, should we not be getting people who are younger to save more into their pension earlier and address this issue later on if we can? Because there is benefit to starting your pension earlier and paying more money in from you and your employer earlier, and then when you have moved through your career, paying off that debt at a later stage and maybe helping people that way around. So flipping on his head, starting the pensions earlier and dealing with the debt later on.
Yeah, interesting. I think this sounds like a bit of a Generation Y question to me.
Yeah, absolutely. The management of the different pots, the compartmentalisation of what you need to achieve in the short, medium and long term is very much an issue for Generation Y and Z and planning for the future and making sure that you are putting the right things into place at the right time. I think you're absolutely right, Graham, that debt is something that, if it's the right sort of debt, then can be managed appropriately and doesn't necessarily need to be too high up the priority list. And mortgage is a perfect example of that. But whether we'll see a shift in those generations away from the property ladder because of the difficulties in actually getting on in the first instance may then change the focus and put it back onto pensions and alternative savings.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you very much for that, Abel. Now, I can see something here that says Tim Sharp written all over it here. Pensions are a societal issue, not an employment issue. Should we move to talking about how we care for those who no longer work on a universal income model?
Excellent. We've grabbed the most contentious issue at the last TUC Congress and decided to run with it. The TUC is currently looking at the issue of universal basic income and will produce a report in the summer. I think.
Did you write this question?
No, I certainly did not. I would be quite happy to completely avoid it. I think there are clearly issues of an ageing workforce that are clearly enormous. When Steve Webb touched on the fact that people evidence people are leaving the workforce earlier than they were doing in the 1970s. The government's approach to this thus far has been let's just look at hiking up state pension age and just assume that everybody's going to manage to get jobs. We've done work on this looking at the people who drop out, and there's huge numbers of people dropping out, often unsurprisingly manual workers from age 55, 60. Lots of people, barely half the people are still working 5 years before state pension age. So I think we've got a lot more work to do as a society in ensuring that people can stay working while they still want to do so. I think a lot of people feel forced to leave the labour market. And I think we've got to think as well about how appropriate the working age benefit system is for those who clearly cannot work. And I think that's at the heart of some of the waspy controversies around women born in the 1950s who found their state pension age increased quite dramatically. If people aren't going to go back into work, then why have we got quite a harsh benefit system that seems to be focused on forcing them to do so? So there's a lot of hard work to do on those issues.
Thank you very much indeed, Tim. I think in the issues, because we've got a lot of questions here, I'll sort of move on to the next one, which I think is a great one. In the context of generations Y and Z, and I'd argue even Generation X, given some of Graham's points, is the word pension outdated? Who'd like to go first? I'll pick on Peter then.
Why not? Is the word pension outdated? I think to a large extent it is. But interestingly, it is a word that people still understand. So it has connotations about being old and the connotations that come with that. But it is still understood by people. When I talk to people within my organisation, they will use the word pension. They actually don't use the word savings. We've tried to drift away from using the word pensions, but whenever someone comes to me with a question, they're asking about their pension because they understand what that means to them. So we do need to move with the times. So if pensions becomes part of a wider piece around financial well-being, then yes, I think it starts to change from pensions to savings, but I don't think we're necessarily ready to give it up quite yet.
Sure.
So there may be different views across the panel on that one.
I think some of the arguments about changing the names of pensions rests on the assumption that if we make it sound better, people are suddenly going to engage more if we call it something really racy like lifetime savings. I don't think that's the answer to our retirement savings conundrum. I think we've worked. We know what a lot of the answer is, which is around auto-enrollment and harnessing inertia and just nudging people very strongly towards doing the right thing. I don't think that rebranding is going to be the answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit of a red herring, if I'm honest, and I think the bigger issue really is to help people understand the benefits of a pension. And if you think about an automatic enrolment pension, if you explained to people, here was something which was very, very easy for you to get. You more or less double your money on day one because of the matching contributions from your employer and tax relief. It's locked away so that, against your worst instincts, it's there when you come to retire. And when you come to retire, you've got a choice of how you use it. You can buy the stream of regular income that most people say they want, or you can take a lump of cash out if that's what you want to do. And all the way through, it's well governed by people who are looking out for you and your interests. I think we could do a much better job, actually, in helping people understand why a pension is a good thing that meets their needs.
And Gavin?
Yeah, I think it can. We could argue about the semantics of the word pensions till the cows come home, and I'm sure that brand agencies and marketeers would love to do so. Fundamentally, though, the concept it remains relevant. It must remain relevant, and we have to approach that rather than being distracted.
Sure. Okay, well, I think that's a fairly hefty vote in favour of pensions sticking around for some time to go. So I think the question here, which the panel may find a little controversial, do feel free to not answer it if you don't want to. But I think in the interest of transparency and popularity, I'm going to ask the question at the top. How many of the panel have what they regard as a good enough pension?
I'm quite happy to take that to start with, because it links back to what I was talking about earlier about this target setting. The reality was, I didn't know until, as an organisation, we went through the process I talked about, which was finding out what my projection looks like, and we did it for everybody, and then actually what is a sensible target for that. Having gone through that process, I now know that I was sort of amberish. Mm-hmm. So I know that there's work for me to do. Now, beforehand, I knew I was at the top of our contribution scale. I knew roughly what it would look like. As an individual, I still hadn't gone through that process which we ask people to go through themselves, which is to work out what you're going to need in retirement. Until retirement becomes a reality, you don't sit down and do that, no matter how much we want people to do that, which is why I come back to that concept of giving a target. So I'm now in a better position than I was because we did that piece of analysis. So it wasn't good, but now looking better.
Your Amber. It's good. So anyone else who'd like to take
I'm afraid I haven't got a clue. I really ought to know, but I mean, what I know is I have about 5 years of DB. Don't know what it's worth right at the start of my career. Haven't really sort of worked out what it's worth. I've got about 9 DC pots on top of that. When I look at my annual statements, I had reason to do this recently because my mortgage lender wanted to see what my income would be past retirement age. When I look at the annual statements for those 9 different pots, they're all calculated in different ways. So some of them give me a current fund value, some of them give me a projected fund value, some of them give me a projected stream of income, some of them give me real terms, some of them don't. I think I do know how to work it out if I need to, but I've just never had the energy or the patience to do so. And people in my industry aren't making it easy enough for anybody to do it.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, see, I'd say I'm the opposite to Graham in that I do know what's in my pension pots. I've got a couple and sort of keep a close eye on them, as geeky as that may be, or just as an interest of being in the industry. That's what I tend to do. What I absolutely don't know, though, is whether they will be good enough when I get to retirement, whatever age that may well be, 60, 70, whatever it is that I'm stopping at and putting my feet up. That's going to be something that we have to continually review. So you can't necessarily know that today. You'll only become aware of that much further into the future.
That's great, thank you. And I think it's only fair, although we can't slide out to order quite on this one, to just have a show of hands in the room as to how many people in the room actually feel they have a good enough pension. Not a great number. Who don't know? That kind of implies the rest of you feel you haven't got a good enough pension, which is an interesting response in itself. So there's clearly lots of work to do with all of the room. So I think we've probably got time for just one more question, which I'm going to take off the list and have a look at diversity. Do we need more diversity of gender, age and social background in the pensions industry if we're going to connect with more people? And we've only got a tiny slice of time left for that one, so if I can just almost a yes, no and one reason why from each of the speakers. And again, Peter, you're closest, I'm going to pick on you.
Yes, without a shadow of a doubt. You only have to look around the average pensions conference to realise that that is necessary.
Tim?
Yes, I would certainly have thought so. I mean, I think where we've got to make sure that that's reflected though in sort of meaningful bits of the pensions world. So ensuring that there's, you know, in the governance of pension schemes, I think it's particularly important we have a diversity of experiences. In particular, that there's people with a good understanding of the member perspective in mix.
Yes, it's absolutely critical, particularly in things like trustee boards and independent governance committees, because without diversity, you'll have a whole bunch of assumptions that go unchallenged and untested.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you all. I think within the industry as a whole, you know, we have far too many male faces in suits, and there's not enough shift in the pattern there, but it is about the scheme-specific monitoring of schemes that needs to become more diverse to reflect the membership that sits within those schemes.
That's great. That sounds fantastic. I think, again, a resounding yes to the answer to that question. So I'd just now like to ask for a resounding round of applause, both on specialist subjects